The Gatekeeper's Judgment. The sun was shining brilliantly over the cityscape of downtown Chicago, where towering glass buildings stood like sentinels over the bustling streets. Among them was Sterling Elite Motors, an upscale dealership known for its premium selection of luxury cars. Rolls-Royces, Lamborghinis, and Aston Martins gleamed under the showroom lights like polished jewels. This was a place where the rich came to indulge, where money spoke louder than words, and where status was everything. Behind the sleek white marble desk at the front, Evelyn Carter sat, radiating an air of authority. At 42, she was not just a manager. She was the gatekeeper of this prestigious establishment. With 2 decades in luxury sales, Evelyn had honed an almost supernatural ability to assess clientele at a glance. She could tell, just from a customer's shoes, the watch on their wrist, or the cut of their suit, whether they belonged in her showroom. Today, like any other day, she surveyed the floor with the practiced gaze of a queen surveying her kingdom. Sales associates, clad in tailored suits, hovered attentively around high-profile customers, speaking in hushed tones about horsepower, torque, and bespoke interiors. Evelyn adjusted the platinum bracelet on her wrist and took a sip of her meticulously prepared espresso, her usual routine uninterrupted. Until the bell above the glass doors chimed. A man stepped inside. Tall, broad-shouldered, probably mid-40s. His presence alone was commanding, but his attire, an old gray hoodie, faded jeans, and scuffed sneakers, made him stick out like a sore thumb in a room filled with tailored suits and designer heels. He didn't belong here. Evelyn's instincts told her everything she needed to know. She turned to one of her senior salesmen, David, a sharp-eyed, ambitious young man who had been shadowing her for years. "Don't waste your time," she murmured, barely moving her lips. "He's just browsing." David hesitated, glancing at the man. There was something about him, an ease in his posture, a quiet confidence, but he knew better than to question Evelyn's judgment. "Got it." He nodded and stepped back. But the man wasn't just browsing. He strolled through the showroom floor with an air of casual curiosity, stopping in front of a sleek, jet-black Rolls-Royce Cullinan. He ran his fingers along the smooth surface, taking in every detail with an almost reverent appreciation. Then he turned his gaze toward the desk, toward Evelyn. Without hesitation, he walked directly toward her. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm and steady. "I'm interested in the Rolls-Royce Cullinan. Can you tell me more about it?" Evelyn barely suppressed a sigh. She had seen this before. People who wandered in off the street, wanting to take pictures, sit in the cars, fantasize about a life they couldn't afford. She was too experienced to be fooled by a dreamer. "That's one of our top models," she said, voice clipped but professional. "It starts at $380,000, fully loaded." The man nodded. "Sounds about right." Evelyn folded her arms. "Are you familiar with our financing options? A purchase of this caliber requires significant credit approval or an upfront payment." A slow, knowing smile touched the man's lips. "I won't need financing." She nearly laughed. "I see." She leaned forward slightly. "Well, if you're serious about purchasing, we require a soft credit check before proceeding. It's company policy." David shifted uncomfortably beside her. They both knew that wasn't true. The man, however, remained unfazed. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a slim black wallet, extracting a single card, a sleek, jet-black Centurion card, a kind reserved for the wealthiest of the wealthy. He held it up between 2 fingers. "I'd like to test drive it," he said evenly. Evelyn's expression stiffened. She had made a mistake, but she wasn't about to back down now. "I'm afraid we don't offer test drives on vehicles at this price point unless we verify the buyer's ability to purchase first," she said smoothly. "You understand." The man's gaze held hers for a long moment. Then a quiet chuckle escaped him. "Oh, I understand." Something about the way he said it sent an unfamiliar sensation curling in her stomach. Across the showroom, another associate, Ryan, a newer but eager salesman, had been watching the exchange. Unlike Evelyn, Ryan saw something different in this man, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. The confidence, the way he carried himself, it was the kind of presence that came from people who didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Deciding to take a risk, Ryan stepped forward. "Sir, if you're really interested, I'd be happy to assist." Before he could finish, Evelyn cut in sharply. "That won't be necessary, Ryan." Ryan hesitated. He knew that tone. Final, unquestionable. He glanced between the two of them, then reluctantly stepped back. The man exhaled through his nose, giving Evelyn one last, lingering look. "What would it take?" he asked, his tone almost amused. "Excuse me? What does a serious customer look like to you?" The words hung in the air between them. Evelyn's fingers twitched slightly at her side. "I think we're done here," she said crisply, plastering on a polite but distant smile. "You're welcome to browse, but I have other customers to assist." For a moment, he simply looked at her. Then, a slow smirk curved at the corner of his mouth. "Understood." And just like that, he turned and walked away. But Evelyn had a sinking feeling. She had just made a mistake, a big one. Because the man wasn't leaving. He was still walking through the showroom, moving with a slow, deliberate ease, running his fingers over the luxury cars as if taking notes. He wasn't frustrated. He wasn't upset. Instead, he carried himself like someone who had just learned something important, someone waiting for the perfect moment to act. Evelyn turned her attention back to her desk, pushing away the uncomfortable feeling gnawing at her gut. She had seen his type before, hadn't she? Across the room, Ryan muttered under his breath, "I think she just fired herself." And as the minutes ticked by, Evelyn Carter would soon realize he wasn't wrong. A shift in the air. As the man strolled through the showroom, running his fingers along the pristine exteriors of multi-million-dollar vehicles, an eerie quiet settled over Sterling Elite Motors. The usual hum of polite conversations and enthusiastic sales pitches was suddenly missing. The air was thick with unspoken tension, as if the very walls of the dealership had paused to witness the aftermath of what had just transpired. Evelyn Carter, still perched behind her desk, forced herself to return to her routine. But something gnawed at her, something unsettling. She had dismissed countless people in her years as manager, filtering out the so-called time-wasters and joyriders who had no business stepping foot in her showroom. So why did this particular encounter sit differently in her chest? She clenched her jaw, pushing the thought away. "You were right," she told herself. "You've been doing this for 20 years. You know how to spot a serious buyer. And that man was not one. Or was he?" She turned her attention to Ryan, the younger salesman who had almost assisted the man before she intervened. He was watching from across the showroom, his expression unreadable, but she could sense it. The subtle tension in his stance, the way his fingers curled slightly at his sides. He knew something was off too. Then, as if on cue, the dealership doors opened once more. This time, the person stepping in commanded instant recognition. The arrival of the big boss. A sharply dressed man in his mid-50s strode inside, his leather shoes clicking against the marble floor with practiced authority. He was impeccably groomed, salt and pepper hair neatly combed back, an expensive navy suit tailored to perfection. His presence alone demanded respect. Sterling Elite Motors employees, who had previously been engaged with customers, straightened up instantly. The younger salespeople glanced at one another with widened eyes. Evelyn's stomach clenched before she even needed to confirm his identity. Jonathan Pierce, the regional director. A man she had met only a handful of times, but whose power within the company was absolute. Evelyn immediately stood, smoothing down her blazer, pasting on her most professional smile. "Mr. Pierce," she greeted him warmly, stepping forward. "What a pleasant surprise. We weren't expecting you today." Jonathan barely spared her a glance. His eyes weren't on her. They were on the man in the gray hoodie. The same man Evelyn had dismissed just moments ago. And then it happened. A smile. genuine and wide, spread across Jonathan's face, an expression Evelyn had never seen him wear in her presence before. "There he is." Jonathan strode forward, his voice full of enthusiasm as he extended a hand. "I was just about to call you. Didn't think you'd be stopping by today." The man in the hoodie turned, returning the handshake with an easy familiarity. "Thought I'd check in. You know, get a feel for things firsthand." Jonathan chuckled, clapping him on the shoulder. "You're going to love it here. This is one of our top locations." Evelyn blinked rapidly. Her stomach twisted. She could feel the stares of the employees around her, all of them processing the same horrifying realization that was now slamming into her like a freight train. The man she had just dismissed, the man she had spoken to like he was nothing more than a waste of her time, was someone important. Someone very important. Evelyn swallowed hard, her throat dry. Finally, she found her voice. You two know each other?" she asked carefully, forcing a pleasant expression. Jonathan turned to her with mild confusion before realization dawned on his face. "Oh, I see. You haven't been introduced yet." With a grin, he gestured to the man in the hoodie. "Meet Daniel Cole, the new CEO of Sterling Elite Motors." The words hit Evelyn like a slap. She felt the blood drain from her face. Silence stretched across the showroom floor, thick and suffocating. The younger employees exchanged wide-eyed glances, some subtly inching closer to listen. Even the customers, sensing the shift in the air, slowed their movements. Evelyn's fingers twitched at her sides, but she forced herself to remain composed. This had to be a mistake. A joke. An elaborate test, perhaps. There was no way, no possible way, that the man she had just turned away as an unserious buyer was the very person in charge of the entire company. But Jonathan had said it, out loud, in front of everyone. And Daniel was just watching her, his expression unreadable. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. "Miss Carter, was it?" he asked, his tone smooth and controlled. Her tongue felt heavy in her mouth, but she nodded. "Yes, sir. Evelyn Carter. I manage this location." Daniel let that settle. "You just refused to sell a car to your new boss." A fresh wave of silence crashed over the showroom. Evelyn's lips parted, but no words came out. She could feel her control slipping through her fingers, unraveling thread by thread. The weight of dozens of eyes on her was suffocating. She needed to recover. Fast. "Mr. Cole," she said, clearing her throat, "I assure you, there must have been some misunderstanding. We have very specific policies for test drives on high-value vehicles, and I was simply ensuring that those policies were upheld." Daniel arched a brow. "Oh, so it's company policy to refuse test drives based on how someone is dressed." Evelyn flinched. "I never said that," she defended quickly. "We just—" Daniel cut her off. "Funny," he mused, "because I distinctly remember being told that I needed to prove I was serious before even sitting in the car. That I needed a soft credit check. That's company policy, is it?" Jonathan's brows furrowed. "We don't have any such policy." Evelyn felt like she had been punched in the gut. Her gaze darted toward David, toward Ryan, toward anyone who might be able to salvage this situation. But no one spoke. No one dared to. Ryan, in particular, was watching Daniel with something almost like admiration. He had seen it coming. Evelyn's stomach churned. Daniel exhaled through his nose, shaking his head slightly. "You know, I came in today because I wanted to see how our dealerships really operate, how our customers are treated. Turns out, I got an answer faster than expected." He turned his full attention back to Evelyn. "I'll make this simple. I don't run a company where employees decide who belongs and who doesn't based on personal judgment. If that's an issue for you, then you're in the wrong business." Evelyn's entire body tensed. She wanted to protest, to defend herself, to find some way to fix what had just gone terribly, terribly wrong. But she could see it in his eyes. It was already too late. Daniel turned to Jonathan. We're going to have a very serious discussion about the hiring and training standards at this location. Because if this is how our sales managers operate, we have a much bigger problem than I realized. Jonathan nodded gravely. Understood. Then, Daniel gave Evelyn one final glance. I'll have security collect your things, he said. Just like that. As if it were nothing. Evelyn Carter, who had built her career on being the gatekeeper of Sterling Elite Motors, had just been escorted to the exit. Not because she was unqualified. Not because she had made a small mistake. But because, for the first time in her life, she had judged the wrong person. And she had just fired herself. The weight of a name. Evelyn Carter felt as if the world had turned on its axis. One moment, she had been the gatekeeper of Sterling Elite Motors, the sharp-eyed manager who decided who was worthy of stepping into the world of luxury automobiles. The next, she had been exposed, her authority stripped away, her years of experience reduced to nothing in a matter of minutes. And now she stood frozen in place, reeling from the words that had just been spoken. I'll have security collect your things. Daniel Cole, the man she had dismissed without a second thought, had uttered them with such quiet finality that it didn't leave room for negotiation. And Jonathan Pierce, the regional director, the man she had always assumed would have her back, wasn't rushing to her defense. Instead, he nodded grimly and said, Understood. The realization settled in Evelyn's chest like a lead weight. She had been fired. No heated argument. No drawn-out meeting. No warning. Just 4 simple words. She had spent 2 decades sharpening her instincts, building her career, climbing higher and higher in the cutthroat world of luxury sales. She had believed with unwavering certainty that she could read people better than anyone. And yet today, she had judged the wrong person. Now her fate was sealed. The walk of shame. The silence in the showroom was suffocating. The sales associates who had once hung onto her every word now stared at the floor, shifting uncomfortably. No one dared to speak. The customers who had been casually browsing were now discreetly watching, some pretending not to listen while others openly observed the unfolding drama. Rayan, the young salesman she had shut down earlier, caught her eye. There was no gloating on his face, no smug satisfaction, just quiet understanding. He had known. He had seen what she had refused to see. And now, Evelyn felt something unfamiliar and uncomfortable curling inside her. Humiliation. Security had arrived, a tall man in a navy suit who spoke in a low professional voice. Miss Carter, I'll escort you to your office so you can collect your things. She wanted to protest, to argue, to demand an opportunity to explain herself. But there was no explaining this. She had spent years making snap judgments, deciding who was worthy and who wasn't, convinced that her ability to assess people had made her indispensable. Now, she was the one being dismissed, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The CEO watches. As she turned to leave, her heels clicking against the showroom floor, she felt Daniel's eyes on her. She didn't dare look back, but she knew what she would see if she did. Not anger. Not satisfaction, just quiet, calculated observation. Because this wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about teaching her a lesson in a petty, vindictive way. Daniel Cole hadn't needed to raise his voice. He hadn't needed to berate her in front of her employees. He had simply spoken the truth. And the truth had been enough to destroy her. Inside the office, Evelyn's hands shook as she packed her things. The office she had commanded for years now felt foreign, hostile. She moved robotically, placing her laptop, personal files, and a few framed photographs into a box. Every movement was stiff, mechanical, as if she were watching herself from the outside. The weight of what had just happened pressed against her chest like a vice. Her career, her carefully constructed empire, had crumbled in the span of minutes. All because of an assumption. An assumption she had made so quickly, so effortlessly, that she hadn't even considered the possibility of being wrong. Her mind raced, searching for someone to blame. The company? No, Sterling Elite Motors had always been a results-driven business. She had played by the same rules for years, and no one had ever questioned her methods. Daniel Cole. No, he had only exposed what was already broken. He hadn't tricked her. He hadn't set a trap. You did this to yourself. The thought sent a cold shiver through her. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't in control. A final conversation. A knock at the door startled her. She turned, expecting security, but instead, she found Ryan standing there. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, finally, he cleared his throat. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, he said hesitantly. Evelyn's jaw tightened. Sorry for what? Ryan exhaled slowly. For how this played out. I saw it coming, and I didn't say anything. Evelyn scoffed. What were you supposed to say? Hey, Evelyn, don't be an idiot. Ryan shifted uncomfortably. I don't think you're an idiot. She let out a short, humorless laugh. Then you're one of the few. Ryan hesitated, as if debating whether to say something more. Finally, he spoke. You know, I think the worst part is that you actually were good at your job. Evelyn frowned, caught off guard by the statement. Ryan shrugged. You knew how to close deals. You knew how to handle clients. But somewhere along the way, you started deciding who was worth your time before they even had a chance. Evelyn swallowed hard. Maybe if you talked to him, really talked to him, you would have seen it, too. She wanted to snap at him, to dismiss his words the way she had dismissed so many others. But she couldn't. Because, deep down, she knew he was right. Ryan lingered for a moment longer, then gave her a small nod and stepped out. And Evelyn was left alone. A legacy of regret. As she walked out of the dealership for the last time, the weight of what had happened settled onto her shoulders. She had spent her life believing she was untouchable. Now she was just another cautionary tale. The world of luxury sales would move on without her. Sterling Elite Motors would find a new manager, someone younger, someone hungrier, someone who wouldn't make the same mistake. And Daniel Cole. He would change everything. She could feel it. The dealership she had once ruled over would never be the same. And as she stepped out onto the busy Chicago streets, one thought haunted her. She had been the gatekeeper. And she had locked herself out, rebuilding from the ashes. Evelyn Carter had never experienced this kind of silence before. As she walked away from Sterling Elite Motors for the last time, the city noise around her felt distant, muffled. The sharp horns, the chatter of pedestrians, even the rhythmic hum of traffic, all of it was drowned out by the ringing in her ears. She had worked in luxury sales for 20 years, 2 decades of perfecting her ability to read people, to decide who was worthy of her time, who belonged in the world of wealth, and who was simply playing pretend. And in the end, her certainty had been her downfall. Now she had nothing. No job, no glowing reputation, no authority. Just a single box of personal belongings clutched tightly in her arms. And worst of all, she had no idea what to do next. The fall from grace. She tried to compose herself as she reached her car, a sleek black BMW X7, the kind of vehicle that exuded status, wealth, and importance. Only now, as she slid into the driver's seat, it felt different. For the first time, she wondered if she had ever actually belonged in the world she had so carefully guarded. Had she ever truly been part of the elite she had spent years catering to? Or had she just been standing at the door, deciding who could step inside while never fully being welcome herself? Her fingers gripped the leather steering wheel tightly. For years, she had measured success by the brands people wore, the cars they drove, the way they carried themselves. She had believed that wealth had a look, a presence, an unspoken language that only the truly successful understood. But Daniel Cole had shattered that belief in a single moment. A billionaire in a hoodie and sneakers, a CEO who had walked into her showroom, tested her, and found her lacking. And now, she had to live with the consequences. A sudden realization. As she sat in the driver's seat, staring blankly at the city skyline in front of her, Something hit her. She had never actually failed before. Not like this. Sure, she had lost deals. She had made mistakes. She had been called out by higher-ups on occasion. But nothing had ever taken away her position, her power, her identity. This was different. This was complete and utter failure. And she had no idea how to handle it. Her phone buzzed on the dashboard. She hesitated before glancing at the screen. Incoming call, Stephen Carter. Her ex-husband. Evelyn let out a slow breath and declined the call. She wasn't in the mood to hear, "I told you so," because Stephen had always warned her that she put too much of her identity into her job. And now that she had lost it, she wasn't sure who she was anymore. An unexpected message. As she sat in silence, debating what to do next, her phone vibrated again, this time with a text. It was from an unknown number. Unknown. You probably don't want to hear this right now, but you needed this to happen. Call me when you're ready. Evelyn frowned, her brows furrowing. Who the hell? Then it clicked. Ryan, the younger salesman from Sterling Elite, the one who had watched everything unfold with quiet understanding, the one who had tried, in his own way, to tell her she was making a mistake. She should have listened to him. But it was too late for that now. Or was it? Swallowing pride. For a long time, she stared at the message. She could ignore it. She could pretend she didn't care, that she didn't need a lesson from some young, idealistic salesman who had never experienced real power. Or she could finally admit that she had been wrong. With a shaky breath, she tapped on the message and typed back, "Evelyn, where are you?" The reply came almost instantly. "Ryan, coffee shop on 7th and Clark. You should come." Evelyn hesitated. Then, without fully understanding why, she put the car in drive and headed towards 7th and Clark. A conversation she never expected to have. The coffee shop was a small, unassuming place, nothing like the high-end cafes she usually frequented. There were no polished marble tables, no overpriced imported espressos, no hushed conversations between wealthy business executives. Instead, it was warm, lived in. The kind of place where real people went to have real conversations. Evelyn had never felt more out of place. Ryan was sitting at a corner table, dressed in a simple button-down and jeans, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly. When he saw her walk in, he gave a small nod. She didn't know why, but that nod made her stomach twist. Without a word, she sat across from him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ryan leaned back, folding his arms. "You actually came," he said, mildly surprised. Evelyn let out a dry chuckle. "Yeah, well, I don't have anywhere else to be." Ryan didn't gloat. He didn't say, "I told you so." Instead, he just nodded. "Good," he said simply. Evelyn narrowed her eyes. "What's that supposed to mean?" Ryan exhaled, setting his coffee cup down. "It means you have a choice," he said. "You can sit in your car and replay everything that happened today, blaming everyone else for what went wrong. Or you can actually learn something from it." Evelyn stiffened. "You think I haven't learned anything. I think you're still trying to figure out what the lesson is." His words struck deeper than she wanted to admit. She folded her arms, leaning back. "Okay then. Since you seem to have all the answers, what's the lesson?" Ryan met her gaze, unflinching. "That you weren't as good at your job as you thought you were." The words stung. She wanted to snap back, to defend herself, to say that she had been one of the top sales managers in the region for years. But she didn't. Because, deep down, she knew he was right. She had been good at selling. But she hadn't been good at listening, and it had cost her everything. A new beginning. Ryan sighed, rubbing his chin. "You don't have to be done, you know," he said. "You're smart. You're experienced. You could start over." Evelyn scoffed. "Start over where? No one's going to hire me after this." Ryan smirked. "You're assuming everyone in the industry is as judgmental as you used to be." Evelyn froze. She hadn't thought of it that way before. Ryan leaned forward. There's a dealership downtown. Not as flashy as Sterling, but they actually care about their customers. They need someone with experience. Someone who knows how to sell, but is willing to do things differently. He pulled a business card from his pocket and slid it across the table. I already talked to them. They're expecting your call. Evelyn stared at the card. Her first instinct was to refuse, to say she wasn't interested, to hold on to whatever pride she had left. But then she thought of Daniel Cole, of how he had exposed her blind spots without ever raising his voice, of how she had spent so many years believing she was untouchable, until the moment she wasn't. And for the first time, she allowed herself to consider the possibility that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't done yet. She picked up the card. And for the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. A chance to begin again. Facing the truth. Evelyn turned the business card over in her hands, reading the name of the dealership Ryan had mentioned. Horizon Auto Group. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't a household name like Sterling Elite Motors. But it was a chance. Her fingers tightened around the card as she stared at it, her mind racing. Could she really do this? Could she start over at a place that was, let's be honest, a step down from where she had been? Could she swallow her pride and walk into an interview knowing she had been fired in the most humiliating way possible? She looked up at Ryan. Why are you doing this? Ryan leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. Because I don't think you're a bad person. Evelyn scoffed. You could have fooled me. Pretty sure everyone at Sterling is celebrating right now. Ryan smirked slightly. Some of them, maybe, but not me. Why not? Ryan studied her for a moment before answering. Because I saw what you were capable of. You weren't just some cutthroat salesperson. When you actually wanted to, you could read people like a book. But somewhere along the way, you stopped actually seeing them. You started assuming you knew the whole story before they even spoke. Evelyn exhaled through her nose, staring down at the coffee cup in front of her. Ryan was right. She had stopped seeing people for who they were and started categorizing them based on appearance alone. She thought of Daniel Cole, the man she had dismissed the moment he walked in. She had seen a hoodie and sneakers. She hadn't seen power. She hadn't seen success. She hadn't seen the CEO of the company she worked for. And now she was paying the price. A hard decision. Evelyn tapped the business card against the table, biting the inside of her cheek. I don't know if I can do this, she admitted. Ryan tilted his head. Why not? She hesitated. Because it felt like failure. Because going from a high-end luxury dealership to Horizon Auto Group felt like a massive step backward. Because she had spent her whole career chasing prestige, status, and exclusivity. What did it say about her if she now had to take a job at a mid-level dealership that catered to everyday customers? Ryan seemed to read her thoughts. You think it's beneath you, he said simply. Evelyn bristled. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Her jaw tightened. I worked my way up to Sterling. I earned my place there. Ryan nodded. And look where it got you. That shut her up. The silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable. Then Ryan leaned forward, his expression serious. Look, you can sit here and sulk. You can tell yourself that you were wronged, that you deserved better, that this was unfair. But deep down, you know that's not true. You lost your job because you got comfortable judging people. You thought you were too smart to ever be wrong. Evelyn flinched, but she didn't interrupt. Ryan continued, This is your chance to do things differently, to actually talk to people, to see them instead of making assumptions. You don't have to stay in this industry. You could walk away, do something completely different. But if you want another shot, it's right there. He gestured to the business card. Evelyn stared at it. Her stomach twisted. Could she really walk into a dealership like Horizon after years of working with the elite? Would they even take her seriously, knowing how her last job ended? What if she failed again? But then, A darker thought crept in. What if she did nothing? What if she let this moment define her forever? The call. Ryan watched her silently as she reached for her phone. Her hands were shaking slightly as she dialed the number on the card. A woman answered after 2 rings. Horizon Auto Group, this is Lisa speaking. How can I help you? Evelyn cleared her throat, forcing confidence into her voice. Hi, Lisa. My name is Evelyn Carter. I was told to call about a potential position. A pause. Oh, yes, our manager, Mr. Lawson, mentioned you might be calling. Would you be available to come in for a meeting tomorrow? Evelyn hesitated for only a second. Yes. What time? 10 a.m. Sounds good. I'll be there. Great. We'll see you then. The call ended. Evelyn slowly set the phone down, exhaling. Ryan smirked. That wasn't so hard, was it? She rolled her eyes but couldn't hide the small, nervous smile tugging at her lips. I guess we'll see. The interview. The next morning, Evelyn stood outside Horizon Auto Group, staring at the glass doors. It wasn't like Sterling Elite. There were no Bentleys or Rolls-Royces on display, no high-end marble floors, no velvet ropes to keep unworthy customers away. Instead, she saw a steady stream of everyday people, teachers, nurses, construction workers, walking in and out, looking at cars they actually needed rather than ones they dreamed about. For the first time, she realized something. This is what real customers look like. Taking a deep breath, she stepped inside. A middle-aged man with a friendly face and a neatly pressed shirt approached her. You must be Evelyn, he said, extending a hand. I'm Mark Lawson, the general manager. She shook his hand, feeling an unfamiliar sense of nervousness. She wasn't used to being the one on the other side of the desk. Have a seat, Mark said, gesturing toward his office. She did. So, he said, leaning back, Ryan spoke highly of you, said you have a lot of experience in sales. Evelyn nodded. I do. He studied her for a moment. And why do you want to work here? The question caught her off guard. For years, she had answered interview questions with polished, calculated responses designed to impress. But this time, she didn't have a script. She didn't have an advantage. She had nothing to hide behind. So, she told the truth. Because I need to learn how to be better, she admitted. I spent years deciding who was worth my time before I even spoke to them. And it cost me everything. Mark nodded slowly, considering her words. Finally, he smiled. Well, he said, you're in the right place. A new beginning. Evelyn Carter walked out of Horizon Auto Group with a job offer. It wasn't sterling. It wasn't prestige. But it was a second chance. And this time, she wasn't going to waste it. Learning to see. Evelyn Carter had never felt so out of place in a dealership before. Horizon Auto Group was nothing like Sterling Elite Motors. At Sterling, the atmosphere had been one of exclusivity, polished marble floors, hushed voices, high-powered executives in tailored suits speaking in careful, clipped tones. Every customer that walked in was assumed to be wealthy until proven otherwise. Here, at Horizon, the energy was different. The showroom was bustling. The sales team wore business casual attire, none of the stiff, intimidating suits she was used to. The customers were ordinary people, families with young children, middle-class professionals, first-time car buyers. It wasn't about status here. It was about need. Evelyn had spent years catering to the ultra-rich, memorizing every feature of luxury brands, learning how to appeal to people who bought cars as a status symbol rather than a necessity. Now she was standing in a place where customers weren't trying to impress anyone. They just wanted a good, reliable car that wouldn't break the bank. She had no idea how to sell to people like that. And that terrified her. The first day, Evelyn adjusted the name badge on her blouse and took a deep breath. It had been years since she was the new hire anywhere, and the feeling was uncomfortable. The other salespeople were friendly but skeptical. She could see it in their eyes, the silent question they weren't asking out loud. What was a woman like her doing here? It wasn't just that she came from a high-end dealership. It was the way she carried herself. The way she walked with that same authoritative stride she had perfected at Sterling. The way her sharp eyes still instinctively scanned the showroom, assessing every customer who walked in. She was still judging. She hadn't meant to. It was automatic. Old habits didn't die overnight. "Hey, Evelyn." She turned to see Mark Lawson, her new manager, approaching with a clipboard in hand. "How are you settling in?" he asked. Evelyn forced a smile. "It's different." Mark smirked. "I imagine so. I know you came from a place that catered to a very specific kind of customer." That was one way to put it. "But you're here now," he continued. "And I'll be honest with you. We don't sell luxury fantasies here. We sell reliable transportation. People don't walk in here to flex their wealth. They walk in because they need a car to get to work, to pick up their kids, to live their lives." Evelyn nodded stiffly. "I understand." Mark gave her a knowing look. "Do you?" he asked. "Because I'll tell you right now, if you're still thinking like you did at Sterling, you're going to struggle here." The words hit like a punch to the gut. Evelyn swallowed hard. "I just need to adjust." Mark nodded. "Good, because you're about to get your first customer." Evelyn turned as a man in his late 30s walked in. He wasn't dressed in designer clothes. He wore a plain button-down and khaki pants, and his shoes looked like they had seen better days. At Sterling, she wouldn't have given him a second glance. Here, he was exactly the kind of customer she needed to learn to help. "Go introduce yourself," Mark said. "See what he needs." Evelyn's palms felt damp. She had been selling cars for 20 years, and yet in this moment, she felt like a rookie on her first day. She took a breath and approached. A different kind of sale. "Good morning," Evelyn said, putting on her best professional smile. "I'm Evelyn. How can I help you today?" The man gave her a small nod. "Hey, I'm looking for a car, something affordable. My old one broke down last week." Evelyn's brain immediately started calculating. At Sterling, she would have steered a customer toward a vehicle that matched their status, an entry-level luxury sedan, maybe. Something aspirational. But this wasn't Sterling. And this man didn't care about status. She forced herself to shift gears. "What's most important to you?" she asked. "Gas mileage. Safety. Space." The man exhaled. "Honestly, price. I just need something reliable. I commute to work every day, and I can't afford to miss any more days." Evelyn felt something stir inside her, something unfamiliar. It wasn't about upselling. It wasn't about pushing the most expensive model to boost her commission. This man needed a car. For the first time in years, she had to actually listen to a customer instead of just selling to them. She nodded. "I think I have a few options for you. Let's take a look." Breaking old habits. As they walked through the lot, Evelyn found herself fighting against years of ingrained instincts. At Sterling, she would have subtly guided a customer toward the most expensive version of whatever they were interested in. Leather seats, panoramic sunroof, custom rims, all the little details that elevated a vehicle from ordinary to elite. But here, that didn't matter. The man didn't want luxury. He wanted reliability. For the first time, Evelyn had to unlearn everything she had relied on for 20 years. She walked him through a few models, asking real questions, not just about the car, but about his life. Where was he commuting to? Did he have a family? Was gas mileage a bigger concern than comfort? Slowly, she realized that this kind of sale wasn't harder. It was more real. When they finally settled on a used Toyota Corolla that fit his budget, the man smiled. "This is perfect," he said. "I think this is the one." And for the first time in a long time, Evelyn felt something she hadn't felt before. Satisfaction. Not because she had made a sale, but because she had actually helped someone. A lesson from the past. As she finished up the paperwork, she noticed Mark watching from a distance. When the customer left, Mark approached her. "Well?" he asked. Evelyn exhaled. "That was different." Mark smirked. "Good different." Evelyn hesitated. Then, finally, she nodded. "Yeah," she admitted. "Good different." Mark clapped a hand on her shoulder. "Keep that up, and you might just have a future here." Evelyn nodded, but deep down, something was still gnawing at her. She had learned something today, something she should have realized years ago. Not every customer needed to be impressed. Some just needed to be understood. And as she stood there in the middle of a dealership that felt worlds away from where she had come from, she finally asked herself the question she had been avoiding since the day she got fired. Had she ever really been good at her job? Or had she just been good at selling an illusion? For the first time, Evelyn wasn't sure of the answer. But one thing was clear. She was finally ready to find out. Redefining success. Evelyn Carter sat at her desk in Horizon Auto Group, staring at the quiet hum of activity on the showroom floor. It had been a month since she started working here. A month since she had been humbled. A month since she had realized that success wasn't what she had always thought it was. She had spent 20 years believing that the luxury market was the pinnacle of sales, that selling to the wealthy, the elite, the powerful was what made her valuable. But the past month had shattered that belief. Because for the first time in her career, she wasn't just selling cars. She was helping people. The reality of real customers. At Sterling Elite Motors, a sale had always been a game. Customers weren't buyers, they were conquests. It was about convincing them they needed the latest model, persuading them to go for the upgraded features, pushing them to spend more than they had intended. It had been about status, image, prestige. But here, at Horizon, the customers were real people with real problems. A single mother who needed a minivan that wouldn't break down on the way to work. A young college graduate buying his first car with savings from his part-time job. A retired couple looking for something fuel-efficient because gas prices were too damn high. These people weren't here to be charmed. They weren't here for status. They were here because they needed something practical, reliable, and affordable. And that meant Evelyn had to become someone different. A different kind of sale. It happened on a Tuesday. A woman in her mid-50s walked into the dealership, looking nervous. She was dressed modestly, a simple blouse and slacks, and clutched a worn-out leather purse tightly to her side. Evelyn, out of habit, almost dismissed her. Then she caught herself. She took a deep breath and approached with a smile. "Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm Evelyn. How can I help you today?" The woman gave a small, hesitant nod. I need a car. My old one finally died on me. And, well, I don't have great credit, but I have some savings." Evelyn's instincts flared up. At Sterling, she would have gently steered this woman away, suggesting that she come back when she was ready. A polite way of saying, "You're wasting my time." But that was the old Evelyn. The new Evelyn. She nodded. "I understand. Let's talk through your options." The woman's shoulders relaxed slightly, as if she had been expecting to be turned away. Evelyn led her to a desk and listened. For the first time in her career, she actually listened. The woman, Theresa, was a widow. She had spent years raising her 2 kids alone. She had always put them first, working double shifts, cutting corners where she could, making sure they had what they needed, even if it meant driving an ancient, unreliable car for way too long. Now both her kids were finally grown and doing well, and for the first time in years, she was making a purchase for herself. She didn't need anything fancy. She didn't care about name brands or luxury features. She just wanted something safe, reliable, and affordable. Evelyn felt a twinge of guilt. How many people like Theresa had she ignored over the years? How many hardworking, deserving people had walked into Sterling, only to be treated like they didn't belong? And the worst part? She had been proud of it. That realization hit her harder than any firing ever could. The moment everything changed. Evelyn helped Theresa find the perfect car. a used Honda CR-V in great condition, well within her budget. She worked with the financing team to get her an honest deal, with no unnecessary add-ons or hidden fees. And when Theresa signed the final paperwork, tears welled up in her eyes. "I never thought I'd be able to do this," she whispered, smiling. "Not on my own." Evelyn felt a lump in her throat. At Sterling, she had sold cars worth more than this woman's house, and yet she had never felt this kind of satisfaction before. This wasn't about prestige. This was about making a difference. A conversation with Mark. Later that evening, as Evelyn was closing up for the day, Mark Lawson walked into her office, leaning against the doorframe. "Saw what you did for Theresa today," he said. Evelyn shrugged. "Just doing my job." Mark smirked. "No, you actually cared. That's different." She didn't argue. Because he was right. Mark crossed his arms. "Tell me something. If Sterling called you right now and offered you your old job back, would you take it?" Evelyn didn't answer immediately. A month ago, the answer would have been a resounding yes. But now, she thought of Daniel Cole, the CEO she had judged without a second thought. She thought of Ryan, the young salesman who had forced her to see the truth about herself. She thought of Theresa, who had walked out of the dealership today with her first ever car purchase on her own terms. And she realized something. She wasn't the same person anymore. So, she looked Mark in the eye and shook her head. "No," she said, "I wouldn't." Mark grinned. "Good, because we could use someone like you here." The final lesson. That night, as Evelyn walked to her car, she felt lighter than she had in years. She wasn't working for status anymore. She wasn't chasing prestige. She wasn't trying to impress people who didn't care about her. For the first time, she was actually proud of what she did. As she got into her car, she pulled out her phone and typed a message. "Evelyn, hey Ryan, just wanted to say thank you. I needed this." A moment later, her phone buzzed with a reply. "Ryan, told you so." Evelyn chuckled, shaking her head. She had lost everything at Sterling. But in the process, she had found something much more valuable. She had found herself. And this time, she wasn't going to lose it.